I'm here with Huib van Bockel, who is a freelance consultant now, but he was formerly with Unilever, MTV, and also the European marketing director of Red Bull. And we met in one of our executive seminars, and you surprised me by sending me this book, which now has a quote from me on top, The Social Brand. And one of the concepts I really like about this book, and I think it fits the philosophy of this MOOC quite well, is this idea of a brand bank account, which has deposits and withdrawals, very much like the debits and credits you might have in a regular accounting statement. How did you come up with this, and what are the two sides, the debits and credits, in your model?
So how I came up with it is a bit of a long story, but I was reading the Art of Loving. So it's a book on love by Eric Fromm, and he says in this book, he says the wrong question. We ask ourselves the wrong question when it comes to love. So we ask ourselves, how can I make other people love me more, as opposed to how can I develop my own ability to love? He says that should be the right question. And I was reading that, so I thought, oh my God, that is exactly the same as what we do in the boardroom, right? We're constantly asking, how can we make people love us more? Basically, every ad out there is basically begging us to love them more. You know, like my new car, like this new product. And if we could turn that around and say, how can we do more for the people that are important to us? You know, that would be a major step change in the way we do business, and also a really much better way to build loyalty, to, you know, to actually do something for the people that are important to you. And then I thought on that basis, like, how can you kind of measure or kind of inspire people to do more as opposed to take? And then I came up with kind of the philosophy of the brand bank account, saying, okay, make sure to give more than you actually take. And then, you know, the giving, it could be anything from a, you know, great piece of content, a nice event, a great, you know, a nice, you know, branded shop, or anything that you can actually give something of true value, as opposed to the taking side of things, like the withdrawals, which are kind of effectively the old school advertising, you could say, like, you know, pop-ups or even advertising, when they're effectively interrupting what you're doing.
What's your experience in terms of what does it take to actually make more deposits? What does it take? Is it a philosophy? Is it operational? Do you have to have different people involved?
Yeah, I think it starts with a really clear, you know, brand mission. You know, it's a sense you know, you've got a lot of positioning statements is still the main way of marketing. You know, how you position your brand, and I know a lot of brands are now talking about more purposeful positioning or that kind of stuff. But I still see, and mainly it's still a positioning. So I think that's where you have to start to say, okay, what's your real brand mission? What are you going to go out and achieve in this world? What is it that you have to say? If you don't have a real big point of view, or you don't have a clear mission of what you want to achieve, it's very hard to come up with giving activations. So I think that's where you really have to start.
What would be an example of a clear mission, and maybe one that's not so clear? Have you been involved in one where a company has changed from positioning to a clear mission?
Funny, I really don't see it happen a lot. So, for instance, I think Google is one of the clearest examples, right? They say, make information available to all. Now, and then that's their mission. But then if you look at it, if that would be a classical marketing company, and that would be their positioning, they'd then start communicating about that. They'd start putting ads out there and say, Google is the best, you know, information provider on earth. Check them out on google.com. But they don't do anything of that. They just create products that are actually making information available to all. They create a Google Maps or Google Earth or analytics if you've got a business, right? So they just give you that information constantly, and that's why they're such a loyal fan base. You know, so when Bing came along, they had no, you know, there was no chance they'd get along, because there's so many people had been given stuff by Google over the years. So I think that's a really clear example. And a good example, you know, but it's always, that's the annoying thing, it's always the same, because there's not a lot of people doing it well, I think. So Nike is another great example. They say, you know, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And what those guys then genuinely do is they say, okay, if you're in the running team from Nike, they genuinely want to make you run. So they also do ads. So I think it's also a mix, right? They can't, so especially some companies, Google, of course, is easier because you know, they get a lot of people coming through their, you know, on their website every single day. But you know, Red Bull as well did that. Nike does that. So it's a mix of just advertising, where you, you know, can, you know, get your awareness, get your, you know, awareness for your new product out there. But the way you really build brand love, I think, is by doing things for people that people truly appreciate. And no matter how funny you think your ad is, that will never build a real loyal consumer, because they will not really love that. You know, that's at least my philosophy.
So for Nike, it would be the fuel band which
Yes.
actually helps you run and maybe
Yeah.
actually change you as a person, right? It
Exactly.
transforms you at
Yeah.
the end of the day.
And that's a great example, because then you go online and you share, how much you've been running that day. So because they actually give you something of value, you'll want to go out and share that with others. So that's also a really clear indication. If you've given something of value, they will share it. Well, if it's interrupting, no one's going to share the new pop-up that came by, right? So it's a great way to see if you're doing the right thing.
And if I look at your brand Red Bull, and I've written a case study on the company, there seem to be, you seem to think about, if it's about sort of a carbonated, semi-carbonated drink, it's about sales, distribution, maybe advertising, but really at that level, it seems like Red Bull's doing all kinds of other things, whether it's the Red Bull girls, the events. How is Red Bull differentiated in that space, or brands like Red Bull?
Yeah.
And what does it take to deliver on that? Because that doesn't seem to be easy to copy.
I think what the big difference is, why it's so difficult to copy, is then first of all the mission, and then second the organization has to be put in place. So if you're going to think about Red Bull, it's about giving you wings, right? It's genuinely a commitment. A great example of that, I think, was when Felix Baumgartner jumped, for the Stratos jump, and a friend of mine was at Cannes, and then they were going to give away the big prize. I don't know what's it called. We'd never go to Cannes, and then they literally said, well, before we give it away, actually the winner should have been Red Bull with Stratos. But then they sent a Red Bull apparently a mail to the Red Bull head office, and then the head office replied back and said, this was not marketing. This was not a piece of advertising. So we don't want to win this prize. And I think that's a great example of how Red Bull operates, because they thought, their genuine belief was, can a man break the speed of sound? Can a man by himself, that had never been done before, break the speed of sound? Right? And only then it is thought of like, what content can we create around that? So it's another starting point to what most brands do, is think, how can we get more awareness? How can we do this? How can we, they think from a giving wings perspective, as opposed to from a let's sell more perspective. So I think it's a huge, although it sounds small, it comes back to that question I asked and said in the beginning, as opposed to how can you make them love you more? So what can you do more? That would be a huge paradigm shift. So I don't think people are just making that yet. And then second, what you have to do is then put the organization in place to go do that. So Red Bull has a lot of internal resources that do that all themselves, because it's harder, I think, to get an advertising agency or to get an advertising agent to come up with something like that, because it would also be less genuine per se, right? So in Red Bull, we'd all come up with ourselves and then all execute it ourselves. And that's the beauty. If you've got a really clear brand with a really clear mission, and that single brand company, you can hire people that are the brand, and then all the other stuff becomes so much easier, right? Because your social media becomes more authentic. All your events become more authentic because it's people that live the brand that do it. If you compare that with the brands like companies like Unilever or Procter, where basically people move around between these brands, it's much more difficult to create something like that. So those brands will have to, or those companies will have to do something about that, I think, to kind of create that real love for that brand internally before it can come out externally.
So this brand bank account, most companies don't have the luxury to rehire people. How would you implement this? What would you do with it, especially on the experience side? How would I use this concept in practical terms?
Yeah. So I think also one that is really important is to not think of the people that you're doing it for in terms of data or consumers. I always think that's very important, but that's also very much, overhyped, the whole data thing. Because what essentially has happened is that because people are harder to reach, because they're more spread out, they're not behind TV and their magazines anymore, then we use data to kind of track them down. While that kind of makes you lose the connection with who they actually really are and what they love doing. Now again, if you take the Nike example, they've got a Nike running team. So they define their consumers as runners. They don't go 15 to 49, housewife, ABC, those kind of, the terms that most companies still, they think, what can we do for runners? So I think if you're thinking of experience, you have to think of a group of people that will enjoy that experience. So you just mentioned the BMXs for Red Bull. In that case, we talked to BMXs and said, okay, what do you guys need? What do you want? And they said, well, we don't have enough dirt spots to ride on, you know. Okay, well, let's make that happen, you know. So it's a great example of, you know, defining a group of people that is actually a group of people, you know, that love to play tennis or love to play, you know, as opposed to, you know, as an age bracket or I think you've mentioned that in your case, right? Yes. There's, what's it, Prince Charles versus, what was his?
Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy Osbourne, you know, exactly same age, probably, you know, not...
But very different people.
Or both quite a lot of money, you know, so they'd probably be the same, but they're very different people that love different things.
And I guess if I took this, what you just mentioned, taking your bank account example and the deposits and withdrawals, if you make enough deposits, you don't actually make any more withdrawals. It's your customers who then make the deposits.
Yeah, they start doing it for you, and I think it's inevitable, and that's why it's also obviously it's also very inspired by the emotional bank account from Stephen Covey. You know, who also says in every relationship there will be withdrawals and there will be, you know, deposits. So that's why it's important. And the more strong a relationship is, like with your bank, for instance, the more withdrawals there will be, right? Because you'll always be annoyed that sometimes you're abroad and they block your, you know, your credit card again. But, you know, so you have to be, so the more connected you are with your customer, the more you'll have to give them, because there will inevitably be, you know, withdrawals.
Yeah, I think anybody who's a frequent flyer on an airline knows that your most trusted airline is the one that has the most opportunity to mess up.
Yeah.
Which actually raises the game, and I think it's a very powerful way of thinking about it. Because we tend to forget that good relationships actually have many, many more bad occasions because you have so many more interaction opportunities.
Exactly, yeah. So the more interaction you have, the more there will be bad.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation. I think it's a new accounting method that I can highly recommend to any business. Thank you.
Thank you.